This module deals with forms of organization. As you'll see, there are fundamental forms that you can use in your writing that are like templates, which reduces your thinking time and improves your clarity. One of the interesting things about nature is that nature is efficient and tends to repeat successful forms. So for example, there are basically only 17 forms of the way living things are structured. There are half a dozen or so blood types. There are 6 or 7 types of galaxies. There are 30 or less types of personality. We would not be surprised then to think that in our writing we would find some of these forms repeated again and again. These are the forms of organization. The ones I cover here is not a complete list, but are the most common. When you are short on facts and long on argument, you want to use a deductive triangle. In the deductive triangle, your assertions are supported by sentences below the main idea, and below that there might be facts. So the idea is that you're building a triangle where the foundation are the world's facts or observations or thoughts, and then the roof, if you will, is the general assertion you are making with the deductive triangle. Here is a deductive triangle in written form. So the same material you saw on the previous page, the previous slide, is now put in the world of prose, so that you can see how it fits. The next form of organization is the inductive triangle. If the deductive triangle was championed by the ancient Greeks, the inductive triangle was created in the Renaissance and after. It is the form that most scientific writing nowadays takes. So what you have is, you have the presentation of data first, and then drawing some conclusions from the data, and then finally drawing a complete conclusion. The concept is that if the data are correct, the conclusion is correct. So this is, as I said, scientific writing of all sorts, general social studies of various kinds, scientific papers, and so on. Notice that the inductive triangle presents the data first in the form of a chart, and then infers from the data several ideas, and finally makes a conclusion. When we want to describe or discuss a process or procedure or policy, we want to use the circle, because most of the times these kinds of things have a beginning, go through various steps, and come back to the beginning once again. So in this circle, we have photosynthesis, and we have the process laid out step by step. As you can see, the two halves of the process are separated into 2 paragraphs, and you see the logic of the process as we lay it out step by step. This way you can see the interconnectedness of all the pieces. So when you next time have to write a procedure, or you next time have to write a process, this is a good tool to use. The river deals with factors toward an outcome. What's important here is that you see the time arrow above, which shows you that the factors and the outcome are on a historical scale of some sort. So they are causes and the consequences, if you will. Here the paragraph lays out the causes and the consequence, so that we can see the clear relationship between what happened and the outcome. The delta is also historical, and it is really from the present to the future, so that we have the time arrow once again moving in one direction, and we have the cause and the consequences, the outcomes. So it's the present, which is the report, and then the 4 outcomes. their shareholders. Suing, the new accounting firm was hired, credit rating was reduced, and 300 employees downsized. The write-up of the delta is straightforward. You present the causes or the factors that happened, and then present the conclusion. So not very complicated, but good to know. A story is the most ancient form of organization. I imagine Stone Age people sitting around their fire every evening and sharing stories of what their days were like. Stories deal primarily with the world of emotion, and they create rising tension in the emotion when the story is being told. So in the case of a Stone Age man, he might be telling the story of how he chased a rabbit and then failed to catch him. And then at the point of where the climax of the story is, or where the story resolves itself, we feel a sudden shift in relief and resolution because now we know more about the story. So this outline here in the slide gives you a good feeling for this story. Read the story and see how your reaction shifts as the story grows more tense and more scary. So this is the way it works. And then we have the resolution, which is the laughter. Finally, we have apples and oranges. And apples and oranges are a popular way to present information because you are comparing and contrasting. And so here I've provided a triangle and a square for your comparison and your contrast. This paragraph provides both the comparison and the contrast of an apple and an orange, period. So we get an understanding of how these two are both alike and not. Furthermore, it's a very popular form nowadays. For example, in computer magazines, when the article compares various manufacturers of a particular kind of computer, you have your rows and your columns, with the rows being the computer and the columns being the various characteristics of the computer. So that's apples and oranges as well. And that's the way we see mostly. We see apples and oranges most often. Here is a chart summarizing the forms of organization so that you can have an easier time of selecting a form of organization. In the first column we have the names of the forms of organization, and then the second column the information type that form of organization tends to use. And then a suggestion as to when to use it, and then who uses it quite often, and finally some examples. It is a valuable thing to do to learn the forms of organization so that when you're confronted with information, you immediately know how it is to be organized, rather than have to sit there and agonize over whether or not it should be this or that. The chart helps, so you might want to keep it handy. Finally, let me illustrate how to use the forms of organization to your advantage. Let's suppose that we've been tasked with the job of writing a proposal that a new boiler should be purchased. So we might take the story to tell the story of the boiler. We could then use the circle to provide the details of the heating system and how it works. We could use the inductive triangle to present poor performance, and the river to explain the causes of poor performance, and then apples and oranges to show the cost benefit of the new boiler, and delta to show how projected, and delta to show projected performance results, and finally the deductive triangle to argue for purchase now. So this is the way you want to think about this material. These are building blocks that you can use in your own work.